Good afternoon, everybody, and it's now time for the Women's Equality Panel to examine problems and solutions in Utah's workplace. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage our moderator, founder and director of Utah Women in Leadership, Dr. Susan R. Madsen, and the panel.
Hello. It's good to be with you today. Everything working with the mic? Yeah, hopefully other people will come on back from the breakout rooms, but it's a delight to be here, and I want to welcome all the panelists today. As was mentioned, I'm Susan Madsen, Director of the Utah Women in Leadership Project at Utah State University, and one of the reasons I've been asked to moderate this panel is that we study and we publish research all the time on all kinds of topics around girls and women. But one of the topics that's been the hottest the last year or so is a report that Zions Bank commissioned us to do on why women in Utah still every year, year after year, 8 years running, we are on the Wallet Hub rankings, the worst state for women's equality in the nation. And then, I know, boo, boo, boo. And we were asked to actually talk about in the report and do research on what can we do to change. So this panel is Utah's problem with women's equality in the workplace and solutions. So I'd like to welcome Sui Lang Panoke, Senior Vice President of DE&I at Zions Bank, and Nikki Walker, the Director of Community Engagement and DE&I at Domo, and then Jonathan Johnson, who's the CEO of Overstock. Next to him is Brit Merrill, who's an employment law attorney at Holland and Hart. And lastly, Jenni Crocker, the Senior Vice President of Operations and Growth at PCF Insurance Services. So welcome to all the panelists. So as I mentioned, we've done this report and continue to look at updates since that report last year on women's equality. And we have been, as I mentioned, for 8 years, the worst state for women's equality. Last year, Sui Lang, you'll remember this. Last year, I used to, out of 100 points, Utah had 29 points. Idaho was the next closest, 7 points above us. And I would say, if we can just get past Idaho, if we can just make a little progress. This year, Idaho made a lot of progress. We're 12 points now behind Georgia. So, but there's hope, and we're gonna get to solutions today. So I'm excited about this panel. So as mentioned, the panel title is Utah's Problem with Women's Equality in the Workplace and the Solutions. So, Jenni Lee, I'm going to start with you on this. The title of the panel, as you mentioned, as I mentioned, is Utah's Problem with Women's Equality. So why do you believe that women's equality in Utah really is a problem for Utah?
So I'm going to just change and try to flip the script just a little bit. So Elaine and I talked about this backstage. So we led with problem, but maybe let's flip the script. And let's talk about opportunity. I think that is absolutely critical because the trick here is that when a company leads with the culture that diversity is a financially, statistically better way to achieve results in your company, that is absolutely where we lead. So instead of leading with, okay, let's focus on this problem and how we can change the gap, I really think it's about looking at the culture of your company and repeatedly saying, making this part of the dialogue, the nomenclature, every single day, when we are a diverse company, we are better. We are financially sound, and there's not a statistic in the world that won't lead to that same path. Every time you look at a diverse company, companies that have women on boards, they are better run companies. They are more financially viable. So I guess I would start with the flipping the script.
Thank you so much. Brit, any comments?
So this is a very interesting question because why is women's equality in Utah a problem? There's two ways to look at that. One, what is causing the problem? Or two, why is it a problem, right? What are the impacts and why is that problematic? And to focus on the second issue there, fundamentally, right, when we're in the workplace as an individual, our talents and what we bring to the table should be what's considered, right? Just because of our race or our gender, we should not be withheld opportunities or benefits or resources, and yet that's happening in the workplace. We all know that. So, starting with that kind of fundamental issue that, and as an employment attorney, it's unlawful to discriminate or to make decisions in employment based on somebody's protected category, and yet it happens all the time. We assume that a woman who becomes pregnant, she's going to be out on a maternity leave, so there's this opportunity for advancement coming up, but she's not going to be interested in that, right? Because she's going to focus on raising her family. These are assumptions that we make sometimes unconsciously or consciously that we need to not do. And then the problem of women's equality in Utah, as an attorney, like I think of the judicial branch, right? Making sure that we have a diverse group of lawyers, diverse group of judges, it's critical. This is one of our branches of government, and we need to lend it legitimacy by having a population of attorneys and judges who represent our population.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. There you go. You have a mic. So
And
why
a voice.
problem?
That's
And
great.
a voice. I love it.
You know, Brit's framed this up two ways, and I think the second way, why is it a problem? I think we answered it perfectly. Companies that have diverse perspectives do better. Why does it happen? I think that's because when families are under stress, statistically, it's usually the woman that leaves the workforce. That's just the case. And I think there's a lot of things we can do to make it so that it's okay socially for the man to leave the workplace. But more important than that, companies need to recognize when families are under stress. We don't want any of our employees to leave the workforce. And so it's what's putting them under stress, what practices can we change so that instead of saying, well, they're going to be under stress, someone's going to leave, let's make it so that, it's more men or more women. No, let's work on making it so we can reduce that stress so that all can stay in the workforce.
I love that. Nikki.
Yeah, I think that when we talk about why this is a problem, it's a problem because without diverse perspectives at the table, we can't be as innovative as we want to be. When there are, 5 straight white men at the table making all of the decisions, we're missing lots of perspectives. And that's not to say that people in and of themselves are not diverse in their diversity of thought. What it is to say is that you're missing lived experiences of other people who might be able to say, well, this widget could be a problem because, and it is their lived experience, their diverse perspective that is sharing all of these potential issues and potential solutions with you. So it is a huge problem not to have women's voice at the table.
And Sue Elaine.
I would love to brand Utah as the state that turns a problem into an opportunity. There's great opportunity here in the Beehive State for women, and I'm all about a challenge, doing something that has never been done before and going from last to the best in X amount of time, right? I also want to note the earlier conversation that we had about 2 panels ago. It was a majority male panel with a male moderator, and for 10, 15 minutes, we were talking about women, and people were intrigued. I want to give props to Thomas Wright, who was moderating. He was talking about his daughters, right? The greatest allies for women and women's equality work are fathers. Fathers. And everyone in this room has women in their lives, whether it's your sisters, your mothers, your colleagues, your daughters. So this issue matters greatly to you. Also just wanted to note Mackenzie Bauer, Mackenzie for Utah, right? What she noted there, we need more women's representation in public office. Public policy impacts every business, every life, every family, all those things. And so as we move forward in closing the gap on women's equality here, all these things matter and want to think about the value that women bring to Utah's economy.
I love that. Great answer for all of you. Thank you so much. And I do need to make a plug as well on women in politics, because what we know from the research on state legislatures, that states with more women on their legislatures actually allocate funding differently than states like Utah. So the number one thing, more funding goes to K through 12. Healthcare kinds of issues, things like poverty, different services for like domestic violence, sexual assault, child sexual abuse, those things. In Utah, we're very low on all of those because we don't have that representation. Now, shifting a little bit, on the Wallet Hub, I'm going to bring it up again, the Wallet Hub, worst state, best and worst states for women's equality, they actually have 17 indicators. 40 of their 100 points are workplace environment. We'll stick with most of those. But just letting you know, 40 points are also under health and education, and then 20 points on women in politics, especially at that top level. And we still, after this last election of Utah's 6 congressional seats, have no women in politics. That really changes things. In the workforce development, or the workforce environment place, the one that gets us every time is the wage gap, the pay gap, gender pay gap. And we can always say throughout all the years that on the rankings we're typically 45th or to 49th. And I could always say Wyoming is always going to be worse. And this year Wyoming passed us. So we are 50th now. So very quickly, let's just address this. The gender pay gap is one of the metrics that really negatively impacts rankings for Utah on women's equality. And just to mention, it's not all about the rankings, but they do represent women's lived experiences, right? So why is this topic important for Utah businesses to address? And maybe mention just one quick thing that each of your organizations is doing to address that. Brit, let's start with you on this one.
So nationally, women earn 82% on the dollar to men. In Utah, we earn 30% less than men. So imagine getting a 30% reduction in your salary, or on the other end, getting a 30% increase, right? So it's a big deal. And attracting and retaining women in our companies is critical to the company's bottom line, to women's experiences in Utah. In terms of sort of what to do about it, as an employment attorney, a lot of my clients are companies, and they will do pay audits. So they will look at, okay, here's our department, this is what everybody's earning, this is the difference between the lowest and the highest. If it's a difference in 15%, why, right? Is it based on seniority? Is it based on merit? Is there a good reason for that? And if not, let's bring up the bottom so that gap closes and is more like 7 to 10%. And what happens, and then you can reward good performers with like bonuses and other things rather than increasing the base salary, because then year to year, when that changes, it gets worse and worse, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you do that at least annually, I'm guessing, or even more often?
Yeah, we have companies who will undertake that annually, and adjust each year. And I'll also mention really quick, right, under the Equal Pay Act, paying men and women differently based on gender is unlawful, and so there's also a legal reason for it.
There is. Jonathan.
Pay audits and any kind of compensation audit. We don't ever go through a raise cycle or an equity grant cycle at Overstock where we don't go through and look, how is this affecting men? How is this affecting women? How is it affecting people of color? We look at it at a lot of different lenses to make sure things are fair. If things aren't fair, and I'll go back to my opening comments, when a family gets under stress, it's easier for the one who earns less to be the one that sacrifices and leaves the job. Our duty as businesses, as employers, is to make sure we're paying fairly. And if you want to attract great women, great employees to work at your company, pay them the same.
Yeah, I love that. And I do, before I go to Nikki, yes, I do want to say I was flying home. It's been probably a month ago from a trip. And I had a woman sitting next to me that was flying into Utah to interview for a vice president role for a company. And she and I started talking about Utah. And I said, how do you feel about coming to Utah? And we were talking, and at one point she got tears in her eyes. And she said, I am scared to come to Utah. I have 2 daughters. And I don't want to be in a place where they get paid less and they're not respected. And I thought, rankings do matter sometimes because it does give that perception, and it's not just a perception, right? Many women experience that as well. Nikki.
Yeah, I think at our company we do annual observations of what is happening with salaries across, but I want to speak a little bit toward the opportunity for women, right? Because before there's a pay gap, right, there is a career gap. And women are not having the opportunities to even get in front of these kinds of jobs, right? So one of the things that I'm really proud of Domo for doing is being one of the founding members of the Parity Pledge.
Yes.
And the Parity Pledge says that if you have a job opening, vice president and above, you will make sure that there's a woman on the interview panel before you move forward with that interview. In doing that, we have increased the women in our leadership incredibly. We went from 0 women on our board of directors to 44% diversity on that board of directors, and 38% of that is gender diversity. So being intentional about getting women these opportunities is what we do really best at Domo.
Thank you. Sui Lang, and then over to Jenni Lee.
I agree with everything my colleagues have shared. To Brit's point, Zions Bank conducts annual pay equity studies internally, and then every other year we bring in a third party to do the same. And so that research has really, and those results we publish for our employees to review, and we've always fallen between 98 and 99% on both gender as well as racial and ethnic background. So that's one thing that we could do. I think it's also important not to just look at salary, but to look at total compensation package. Another thing that is attracting women is flexible work schedules. Oftentimes, I don't know many women that don't balance multiple things, right, inside and outside of the workplace. So offering hybrid work schedules is really beneficial and is attractive to women. Policies, right? Programs that you offer internally are also very attractive to women. We have 9 employee business forums across our footprint. We have 2 focused on women, women in technology, and a women's business forum that offers internal programming that offers professional development, mentorship, opportunities for advancement. These are all part of the total compensation package. And I know we'll talk about leave a little bit later, but just throwing this out there, looking at those for birth moms, we just recently changed our policy to offer up to 100% of your salary up to 12 weeks for birth mothers, and then for parental leave up to 4 weeks, 100% salary. And so these are really above market, and these are really very strategic investments that our company is making to attract and retain both women and just top talent across all gender identities.
Awesome. That's so great. Jenni Lee.
So my co-panelists made this answer very simple. You all have done a great job answering this question. Right, pay audits, yes. Nikki, loved your answer, right? Let's not even start the interviewing process until we have a recruiting group of that we're getting ready to interview that is diverse. I smiled at my head of recruiting because she knows I won't start the interviews until there's a diverse group of candidates. So you all made this really easy. The only thing I would add to that is create a challenger culture. And I feel very comfortable that our C-level team has created a challenger culture, but that's part of it too. Everyone in your organization should be able to look at these things, and just as Sui Lang said, right, let's look at that total comp. Don't just take it for the A, B, and C level, but let's look at the total package and what's important. So allowing that challenger culture becomes important so that you can get to the best answers.
Thank you so much. And one thing that didn't really come up, one person inferred it, is that the research is so clear that the more transparency there is, the more likely women will negotiate, and women will feel comfortable with knowing where things are at. So even the range, and also the research has said that if we don't ask the previous salary question, that helps women as well.
And in many states, that's unlawful to ask as well.
Yes.
Not in Utah.
We're
And
trying to get.
Can I just jump in there too?
Yeah.
Women need to negotiate salaries. Overwhelming majority of the time, and women just accept the first offer that is given to them. Men almost always negotiate that first offer. So that is something that women, we could take upon ourselves as responsibility to close that gender.
We're socialized not to, but also the research does say that women, when they do negotiate, oftentimes they break social norms, and there's pushback. So the unconscious bias training and all of that is super important as well. Let's shift now. Jonathan, I'm going to give you this question first. What are some of the, speaking specifically about advancing women in the workplace, what are some of the challenges and opportunities you've experienced in your efforts to advance women into leadership roles within your company?
So, like Domo, we were founding signers of the Parity Pledge, both for gender and for people of color, and it's made a big difference. When you commit to look for a diverse population, you find a diverse population. That's important. And as we've done so, our board, we're above the national average for the number of women on our board. We've added a black member of our board. We have a chairwoman of the board. Our executive team has become much more diverse. Now, one of the ways we've been able to do that on our executive team has come out of the pandemic. We're a much more remote business. We have a broader pool of talent because we hire nationwide. And when I look at the last 4 C-level executives we hired, 2 of whom were women, 2 of whom were men, 3 of whom were people of color, 1 of whom was not, all 4 of them live out of state.
Oh, interesting.
And that's been useful for us. And frankly, it's useful for our hiring here because our workforce sees a much more diverse C-level talent. Has to start somewhere. And if you are successful bringing people from out of state because the talent pool is a little bit deeper, that helps with your talent pool here as well.
Yeah, it's unfortunate though, in some ways, because we need to grow more talent within our state. But it's good. It has its pros and cons, right?
And I think that does help us grow our talent. And it will help us grow it at Overstock because when people see a diverse C-suite, they say, that's a company I can work for. And that way we can bring people to Utah or find people in Utah who want to be at a company that thinks that way. You have to set the example somewhere to start it. The snowball starts small and then rolls big.
That's such a good point, though. If you can't see, I mean, that's culture. And we know, I speak about this all the time, that we have a lot of invisible masculine cultures in the state. But when you start seeing those people, that helps. Nikki?
Yeah, representation matters. And until you can see it, you don't know you can be it. So it's important that these, we have C-level executives who are women, who are people of color. And I mean, we are on a really similar path. Our last few C-level executives, I can think of the last 2, both women, 1 woman of color and 1 from out of state. And while it saddens me a little that we're unable to find the talent in Utah, it is helpful to know that people from out of Utah are willing to come here and be a part of this community and raise us up because all of the boats rise with the tide.
And don't you have a women's network or a women's ERG? Is that
We do.
connected to advancing women?
We do. So Women at Domo is our women's ERG, and it just relaunched this year. We're really excited. There's so much just exciting emotion sort of surrounding it because it is this opportunity for women to grow and learn from other women. We've connected with She Suite from Tribe House so that we are able to provide our women with opportunities to network and to grow and to be educated, again, by other women. So Women at Domo is very much for women, by women, and it really empowers women to get out there and ask for what they want and to make sure that they're being included in these conversations.
Thank you. And Sui Lang, I know Science, I've spoken for the group at Science, the Women's Forum or the Women's Group. Do you want to talk more about what Science is doing to advance women?
Yeah, very active programs internally and externally. I also want to note in terms of diversity, 1 in 4 Utahns identifies as a person of color. Okay, 1 in 4. And so there's great ethnic diversity that's already here in the Beehive State. So looking at who to recruit and who to invest in, who to develop. So again, to your point, the programs internally through our employee business forums. Also want to note a couple of community partnerships that we're investing in. One is She Money. We just launched this a couple of weeks ago. We are investing in 70 women-owned businesses, and half of that cohort are women of color-owned businesses right here in the Beehive State. And so we're going to launch that program next year. It'll be monthly convenings, and women can gather and receive professional development, mentorship, being exposed to expertise in the field of financial literacy, building your businesses, growing your businesses, things like that. Another partnership is the Ken Garr Foundation. They have a Women Who Succeed mentorship program that is probably one of the most influential and impactful and effective ways to advance and develop women through mentorship. And so if you are a woman or if you are looking to be a mentor or be a mentee, please check out that program.
I love it.
Great.
Jenny Lee.
So I would say it starts with Nikki, and you're the pillar in terms of people who sit in your role for DEI, right? Because there's accountability there. And so when I think about that accountability, that is, to me, the pillar. But then to sort of springboard of what Sui Lang said in terms of the mentoring, I always have this organic challenge anytime I speak somewhere, and I always say, every person in this room take the personal challenge to choose a mentor or work with multiple mentorees and say, I want to help. I want to work with you. I want to get to know you. I want to understand your challenges. And if you work with a woman or a person of color and you help bring them up, the likelihood of them, first of all, staying with your company and being a great builder for your company, but also the likelihood that they will be more successful, trust me, threefold. You have done a great service to that person, and you will honestly, and I bet Sui Lang in that mentoring, I always find I learn more from my mentoree than I think my mentoree has ever learned
Same.
from me. Right. I get more perspective about people in my company. So I think it starts with the accountability, but then it goes into the organic responsibility.
Thank you. And then we'll finish up with Brit.
So many ideas are critical here, starting with having diverse candidate pools, right? If your candidate pools are not looking diverse, consider where you're posting those and getting candidates from. And then having mentorship programs built into work at Holland and Hart, the law firm I work at. We do a really fantastic job at that. And so this idea of, you have to see it in order to be it is huge. And Holland and Hart has done a great job at that.
Can I just jump right in? I'm so sorry. I just want to, while we're having this mentor sort of conversation, I just want to throw out there that our male allies really need to hear this, right? So there's mentorship, grab the mic. There's mentorship, and then there's sponsorship, right?
Yeah.
So now mentors are people who generally work with you, who are in your same company and who can kind of help you, give you career advice. But sponsors, which usually here would be men because they are in those positions to sponsor a person. These people are people who say your name in rooms where you are not. People who see your potential and your greatness and say, this person would be great for this thing. So I encourage all of the women in the room to understand the difference between a mentor and a sponsor. A mentor and a sponsor. Get both. And make sure your sponsors really have your back so they are saying your names in those rooms where you're not.
And I just want to mention, I talk about this quite a bit, but going up to someone and saying, can you be my mentor or can you be my sponsor is not the best thing to do.
Oh, don't ask them that way.
Yeah, just a lot of people think that though. But getting on a team with someone that you want to be your sponsor, doing work for them, showing them, instead of just asking and not reciprocating. So, Jonathan, you were going to make a quick.
I'm glad you said the word sponsor, because I think mentorship is important, but sponsorship is critical. And I think of Overstock's CFO, a fantastic woman who joined our company 3 years ago. I am working to sponsor her to get on public company boards of directors. That makes the difference. It can't just be mentorship, and it has to go beyond that. And I will say, from my perspective, when I have worked with someone on a team and then they ask, can you help me? Can you be a sponsor or a mentor? If that question doesn't happen, sometimes the sponsoring or the mentorship doesn't happen. So I would not be shy about asking that of people
If
who
you know them.
who you know.
Yes, yes,
I
yes.
just think that piece is important. Don't say, well, I'm just going to work with people and they'll get it.
Oh,
No, no.
true.
You'll work with them and then you'll ask them and then they'll get it.
I love that. And Sue Elaine, quick comment, and then we'll shift.
Yeah, just want to build on what my colleagues were saying. We need men mentoring women
Yep.
because men still hold overwhelming majority of positions of power and influence in our business community. In addition to that, a way to alleviate the concerns you guys are talking about, at Zions Bank we have an internal mentorship, formal intern mentorship program. And so people can apply to be a mentor or a mentee, and we still have executive leaders at the bank who apply to be mentees in this program. So that's a way for the organization to take a lead in making those pairings, those matches, so that employees don't find themselves in awkward situations trying to ask.
Yeah, I think there's a mix in the research. Some say that informal direction is more powerful, but sometimes if you have that right connections, it's powerful as well. We need to move on. Our time is moving along. So the one question I've been the most excited about is this, and so we'll keep this quick. Nikki, I'm going to start with you. So what one family-friendly policy or women's-focused development effort do you think is making the biggest difference for your company and moving towards women's equality? Just one. Each of you
One.
just get one.
Sheesh. I think the one for us really is, wow, there's so.
I know.
Wait a minute, which one do I want? So I think we have looked at benefits and we have looked at working conditions, and not necessarily just for women, but they benefit women so very much. When the Roe versus Wade verdict came down, we looked and we said, well, what are we going to do to share with women who have differing views that we care about them and we care about their health, right? So what we did was we instituted a medical travel policy so that any kind of medical issue that you're having or medical procedure that you need to have, whether you're a man or a woman or you are a child of an employee, you have a benefit, a cash benefit that you can go out of state to go and handle whatever medical issues you have. Now, obviously, because we're not a company that is grounded in politics or anything like that, but we understand the diversity of the people who work with us and the diversity of the women. And we don't get to make decisions on their health. We only get to support them. And I think that
Point.
has been incredibly helpful, and it's been something that we've been really happy to tout.
I love that. Thank you. Sue Elaine.
And I think I already mentioned mine earlier, just the family leave policies, things like that. Utah's value family. And so any opportunity that you can create a family-friendly work environment and make sure that you're having that work-life balance. Also with PTO, I learned you have to use like a certain amount of time. Only so much can roll over to the next year, right? And the intention behind that is to encourage you to take that time off so that you can achieve that balance in life. I know many of us struggle with that, me for one. And Susan as well. But that's really, really important. And also, I'm just one woman, so I never want to make an assumptions of what all women at my organization think or feel or how they would prioritize what's important to them. So on that note, I would encourage you to poll your employees. Always, surveying them,
Yeah.
staying on the pulse of where they stand, and then designing your internal policies accordingly.
But as you know, if you poll, you need to do something about it. You need to listen, or else they become dissatisfied. So, Jenny Lee, one family-friendly or women's
I've got to
focused?
say it's hybrid work. I feel strongly that some of the best women who've ever worked for me, and when I look back on the regrets, it was when work had to happen in the office, and I lost them on the bad days, when the baby was sick, or my mother needed help, or whatever those multitude of things that we referred to that all women juggle. I lost them on the bad days when they said, I can't do that anymore. And I think hybrid work has just changed it, and I just encourage every company to give that flexibility, because I look back on the amazing women in my career who just left on the bad days. And now I think there's a solution for some of those bad days.
So a few decades ago, I was living in Minnesota, and I did my dissertation on telecommuting and work-family issues. And then I moved to Utah and found we were about 15 to 20 years behind Minnesota until the pandemic. That's the silver lining, right? It has
The
shifted
great
us forward.
equalizer.
What did you say?
The pandemic was the great equalizer.
Yeah, it was. So, yeah. Brit.
Dr. Madsen, you must have read my notes.
Oh.
I have about 10 items here, but I'm limited to one. So really quickly, in addition to like flex time policies, making sure that you have diverse candidates who you're considering for positions and for leadership positions, one policy that hasn't been mentioned but was mentioned earlier is childcare stipends. So the idea there is I have to work this weekend because I have to prepare for a deposition, so I need to hire a nanny to watch my children. I can then submit that reimbursement to Holland and Hart, and they're going to pay me for that. I think that's a huge deal, and it benefits both men and women. A lot of my male colleagues take great advantage of that as well.
I love that. And I do want to mention, I don't want to forget this, that the Utah Women in Leadership Project is partnering with the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity and also our Lieutenant Governor and Governor of the state on an Inspire in Utah campaign. So if you go to inutah.org, you can see the Inspire. Hopefully you're seeing some of the billboards come up on family-friendly policies. We have a 100 companies championing women, so please apply to be one of those companies. Overstock is, Zion's is, I'm not sure Domo is, I think so, yeah. So just know that that's out there. Back to the question, I didn't want to forget that. Jonathan.
We do all of these things. All of these things are great. I don't know which has the most impact, but I'm going to tell you, cheat and tell you two that I think are unique we do. We offer part-time work where you can pair up with another person for a full-time job.
And that's job sharing.
Job sharing. That lets people back into the workforce after they've taken some time off. Another one that I think is unique, and I haven't heard anyone who does it, if you have a child under 2 and you go on a business travel, we'll pay for your caregiver to go with you.
I think that's awesome. That is really good. So, and I just want to say, because I know your company pretty well with, Dave Nelson and I are friends, but the on-site childcare, but also, what do you call it when your physician is right on site too?
We have on-site medical center, clinic. We have on-site daycare. All
Okay, I
of
said
these are to
one,
make
but
it closer. Yeah.
I egged you on. I said one, but then I egged you on.
I
So
can go on and on and on. But stop.
okay. We are almost at conclusion, but I just want a couple of you maybe to make, what role do you think government, schools, universities, or communities can and should play in terms of solutions for women equality in our state? So we just have time for a couple, and then I'll shift right into the last comment. Anyone want to, I know, okay, you two.
Leading
You two.
role, a leading role.
I mean,
Well, that's
yeah,
it?
a leading role, right? Education, I think, is where we need to be focused on getting women to a space of equality. Because when we start to program our daughters about what they deserve and what is inside of them that everybody needs, then they understand their worth when it's time for them to get into the workforce. So I think education is super important.
Thank you. And for those of you that don't know, we have the widest gap by far of any state in the nation of the difference between men and women in getting graduate degrees. And think about that applies to so many, like the wage gap and all kinds of different things. And we're 43rd in the nation if you compare the difference in 8th grade of math scores between boys and girls. We're 43rd. There are countries with no gap. There are states with no gap. So I just want to put that out there because that has application to a lot of decisions. So let's shift now to my final question. And Sui Lang, you get to start, and you're going to have to be profound today.
Uh-oh.
What piece of advice would you give to companies just starting out on their journey of creating organizational practices and cultures where women in this state can better thrive?
Hire women, pay women, advance women. And when I moved back to the Beehive State about 5 years ago, I was on a panel on male allyship with who is now our governor, Governor Spencer Cox. And what came out of that conversation was, for me, bring women into your inner circle. I've had inner circle of trust, right? When you look at leadership in businesses, they have that inner circle of people that they trust, that they will let in, right, in all of the strategy, those different high-level conversations and decisions. And so bring women into that circle. They will help blow up your business and grow our economy.
Thank you. About 30 seconds each. Jenni,
She was profound. So just as you asked, you delivered. So the big thing for me is do not, your HR department, your recruiting department, that it starts with that accountability. Don't start an interviewing process until there's confirmation that there is a diverse panel, right? You said it. You get what you're looking for. So to me, it's that simple, 30 seconds.
Right. Thank you. Brit?
Two things. One, check your implicit bias, right? When you're hiring candidates, when you're considering candidates for leadership roles, think about your implicit bias, right? There's that resume study, the name, is it Greg versus Jamal, and how Jamal has to have 8 years more experience to be considered for the same position. So check your implicit bias. And two, make sure you're doing it legally. Consult employment counsel.
She's a really good lawyer.
When one wins, we all win. If you have best practices, share them. If you don't have best practices, ask others for them. These aren't to be hid under a bushel. They're to be shared because we will all win as businesses, as a state, and as a community.
Thank you. And Nikki?
Diversity is cool, but it means nothing without inclusion. So when you bring women to the table, make sure you listen to them, give them a voice, and allow them to lead.
Thank you so much. So as we conclude, thank you so much to my panelists, but I also want to make sure that you know about the resources that we offer at the Utah Women in Leadership Project, because we have research on all of these topics, utahwomen.org, and I have some, if those of you that would like reports, I did bring some in my bag on the wage gap and family-friendly policies and some different things like that. And then just finally, you know, there's some movement. More companies are stepping up to really do the things we're talking about. I think there's more hope. We are still the last nation or the last state, though, on women's equality, and there is work to do. There's hope, there's opportunities, but I hope we'll all dig in and do the work that needs to be done so that more girls and women and boys and men thrive in this wonderful state. Thank you so much for your time, and thanks to the panelists.